Starmer's enemies are no longer whispering. They are drawing up the exit route. The Burnham surge has turned Starmer's leadership crisis into a countdown. Starmer is still Prime Minister, but the power has shifted. Keir Starmer's leadership crisis has entered the phase every Prime Minister fears, the point where the question is no longer whether people are unhappy, but whether they have found a realistic replacement. Andy Burnham's decisive Makerfield victory has done exactly that. It has turned Labour's internal frustration from noise into a route map. The confirmed picture is brutal for Starmer. Burnham is now back in Parliament, Labour MPs are openly discussing succession, and cabinet pressure has reportedly moved from private anxiety to demands for a departure timetable. Starmer has said he would stand in any leadership contest and would not simply walk away. But that defiance is now colliding with a party that increasingly sees him as the obstacle rather than the answer. This is why the crisis feels different from normal Westminster turbulence. A weak Prime Minister can survive bad polls. A weak Prime Minister can survive bad headlines. What is much harder to survive is the emergence of a successor who can plausibly tell MPs, "I can stop the bleeding." The Burnham surge changes the psychology of the party. Burnham's Makerfield result matters because it gives Labour MPs something they have lacked for months: a political story that is not just anti-Starmer. It allows them to tell themselves they are not triggering chaos, but managing transition. That distinction is everything. The most dangerous phrase for Starmer is not leadership challenge. It is orderly transition. Once MPs and ministers start using that language, they are no longer behaving like rebels. They are behaving like people preparing the paperwork for a post-Starmer government. Burnham's internal advantage also appears significant. Leadership polling among Labour members before the by-election had Burnham on 42% as first choice, far ahead of Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner on 11% each, with almost two-thirds of Labour members placing Burnham in their top three. Among the wider public, Burnham still led among named alternatives, though with a much weaker national base and a large no-preference bloc. That combination is politically lethal for Starmer. Burnham is not universally loved. He is not fully tested. His policy platform still has gaps, but he gives Labour MPs something Starmer currently does not: a plausible emotional reset. The cabinet pressure is the real crisis. The public focus is on Burnham, but the more important pressure point is the cabinet. Once ministers start telling a Prime Minister to set out a resignation timeline, the Premiership moves into a different constitutional atmosphere. This is no longer just factional muttering from the back benches. The known position is that cabinet loyalists have told Starmer he faces being forced out if he does not set out a timetable. One cabinet minister was quoted saying his departure was now inevitable, while Heidi Alexander was among senior figures said to have expressed concern. This is why the retreating with family detail matters politically, if accurate. It does not prove resignation. It does not confirm a decision, but it fits the kind of private weekend decision window that often appears when a leader is being asked to choose between an orderly exit and a humiliating removal. For Starmer, the problem is that delay now has a cost. If he sets out a timetable, he looks finished. If he refuses, ministers may decide they have to make the ending happen themselves. That is the trap. Who has already come out against Starmer? The anti-Starmer position is no longer confined to the predictable left of the party. That is what makes this crisis so damaging. The list now includes ministers, former ministers, select committee figures, Labour right voices, Labour left voices, Scottish and Welsh Labour figures, and MPs from constituencies terrified of Reform UK. Publicly identified figures calling for Starmer to resign or set out a timetable include Debbie Abrahams, Tahir Ali, Zubir Ahmed, Tonya Antoniazzi, James Asser, Jas Athwal, David Baines, Richard Baker, Richard Bergen, Ian Byrne, Chris Curtis, Alex Davies-Jones, Miata Farnbule, Belle Ribeiro Addy, Josh Simons, Catherine West, Nadia Whitamy, West Streeting, and many others. A Labour-focused tracker put the number at 97 Labour MPs as of Friday morning, with suspended MPs Diane Abbott and Carl Turner also calling for him to go. The most serious names are not just the loudest names. Zubir Ahmed, Alex Davies-Jones, Miata Farnbule, West Streeting, Melanie Ward, Rosie Writing and others are important because resignations and government departures create momentum. They turn criticism into visible institutional decay. Streeting is especially significant because he is not simply anti-Starmer, he is also a potential rival to Burnham. That makes his move more complicated. If he fights, the transition becomes a contest. If he folds into a Burnham arrangement, Starmer's position becomes even weaker. The rules make Starmer vulnerable. Labour's leadership rules are now central to the politics. A contest can be triggered if the leader resigns or if 20% of Labour MPs nominate a challenger. Candidates seeking to enter the ballot must be MPs, and they must also clear further nomination hurdles through constituency parties or affiliates if the contest proceeds. That threshold is now the knife edge. Current reporting suggests Burnham's camp may have support from around 200 MPs, with some claims that the number could rise higher. Even if those figures are inflated, they are well beyond the practical threshold needed to make Starmer's position look unsustainable. This means Starmer's survival does not depend on whether he can technically stand. He can. It depends on whether enough MPs still believe making him stand is worth the damage. That is a very different question. The anti-Starmer case writes itself. Labour has a huge majority, yet the government feels politically exhausted. Reform is rising. The Prime Minister's authority has been punctured. A leader sold as competence now looks trapped in process, caution, and defensive messaging. The Monte Carlo model points to a controlled exit. For this article, I ran a simple 50,000-run Monte Carlo-style political scenario model using the known pressure points: public MP opposition, cabinet pressure, Burnham's nomination momentum, Starmer's stated willingness to fight, the leadership threshold, and the political cost of a full contest. This is not a prophecy. It is a structured probability model based on current incentives. The model's central estimate is stark. Starmer now has roughly a 65 to 75% chance of announcing a resignation timetable or being forced into one before the end of July. The most likely single pathway is not an immediate resignation speech, but a managed timetable presented as stability, dignity, and national interest. The second most likely route is a hard escalation next week. Burnham meets MPs, cabinet pressure intensifies, and Starmer is forced to choose between resignation terms and a visible ministerial collapse. That scenario carries roughly a 20 to 25% probability in the model. A full leadership contest remains possible, especially if Starmer refuses to move or Streeting insists on testing Burnham properly. But the model gives that route a lower probability than a managed transition, because many Labour MPs appear more frightened of prolonged civil war than of replacing Starmer quickly. The least likely major outcome is Starmer simply surviving through the summer unchanged. The model puts that at around 10 to 15%. That does not mean impossible. It means survival now requires not just stubbornness, but a reversal in party psychology. At the moment, the psychology is moving the other way. The most likely timeline now: the immediate pressure window is this weekend and Monday. If Starmer is going to preserve any control, he probably has to offer something that looks like a timetable, a consultation process, or a structured transition. If he offers nothing, the pressure shifts from persuasion to enforcement. The next phase is the coming week. Burnham is expected to use his parliamentary return to meet MPs and demonstrate that his support is not theoretical. If he can show enough MPs are prepared to nominate him, Starmer's argument becomes weaker by the hour. The third phase is late June into July. If Starmer agrees to go, the party can attempt controlled handover. If he resists, formal nomination pressure, ministerial resignations, and public declarations are likely to increase. A resignation timetable could point toward departure before recess, after a short transition, or by early September. The September scenario is important because Burnham allies have reportedly discussed him wanting to be in Downing Street by then. That may now become the compromise timeline. Not immediate collapse, not indefinite Starmer survival, but a staged exit designed to make the Labour Party look less like the Conservatives during their final leadership implosions. Why Starmer's position looks strategically broken. Starmer's fundamental problem is that his strongest argument is procedural, while Burnham's strongest argument is emotional. Starmer can say he won a mandate. He can say leadership contests create chaos. He can say Labour should focus on governing. All of that has logic, but politics is not only logic. It is fear, mood, momentum, and survival. Labour MPs are not simply asking whether Starmer deserves more time. They are asking whether they can defend him on the doorstep, whether he can stop reform, and whether the government has any emotional connection left with the country. That is where Starmer looks weakest. He was elected as the man who would make Labour safe, serious, and electable. But once voters decide safe means dull, serious means lifeless, and electable no longer looks true, the entire Starmer project starts to collapse inward. Burnham does not need to be perfect to exploit that. He only needs to feel more alive than the Prime Minister. Right now, that may be enough. The likeliest outcome is a resignation timetable. The most likely outcome is that Starmer does not survive this crisis in clean, open-ended form. The stronger probability is that he is pushed toward a resignation timetable, possibly framed as an orderly transition to protect the government, avoid a brutal contest, and stop Labour looking consumed by itself. The second most likely outcome is that he tries to fight, only to face a faster escalation from ministers and MPs. That would be uglier, but it may be the only route left if he refuses to accept that authority has already moved away from him. The anti-Starmer reading is simple. The Prime Minister has become the problem his party is trying to solve. Burnham's surge has not created every weakness in Starmer's leadership. It has revealed them, concentrated them, and given Labour MPs a replacement vehicle. Starmer can still technically fight, but the deeper question is whether the party still wants him to win. Once a governing party starts privately answering no, the end is no longer a question of personality. It becomes a question of timing.